who is the editor of the Paris Review, speak to us about her new book, The Cactus League, which has received a lot of wonderful reviews. Emily had originally planned to be the guest of honor at our Translation Prize awards ceremony, which we unfortunately had to cancel. But we are looking forward to having everyone at our Translation Prize awards ceremony when we're able to convene everyone in person, whether that's in the fall or whenever that may be. And our Translation Prize award ceremony, for those who aren't familiar with it, is an award that we give out every year for the best translations from French into English in both fiction and nonfiction categories. So it's a great way to celebrate French literature and how that comes to new audiences. So I will have the pleasure now of introducing Karin Tanabe, who's our moderator, who will then introduce Emily. So Karin is a novelist. She's the author of the historical fiction novels, The Diplomat's Daughter and The Gilded Years, which is soon to be a major motion picture, very exciting. And also The List and The Price of Inheritance. Her fifth and latest book, 100 Suns, was just published, and I actually have it right here.
Thanks.
Very excited to read it. Karin's a former political reporter whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and the Miami Herald. And finally, Karin is a member of the French American Foundation's Young Leaders Program, which is the program that I manage that brings together leaders from France and the US, a lot of talented folks who convene to advance dialogue between France and the United States. So thank you so much, Karin, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Katie. I'm really excited to be here. I'm especially excited to talk about Emily's new book and to talk about the Paris Review and to talk about all her hidden talents, which aren't exactly hidden because they get a lot of publicity, but they're super cool. So I'm going to first start out by reading your incredibly impressive bio, and then a little bit about your book, The Cactus League, and then Emily's going to read from her book. So Emily is a writer, illustrator, and editor. Her debut novel, The Cactus League, was published by Farrar, Straus & Giroux in February 2020. In 2018, Nemens became the 7th editor of the Paris Review, the nation's preeminent literary quarterly. Since her arrival, the magazine has seen record-high circulation, produced a second season of its acclaimed podcast, won the 2020 National Magazine Award for Fiction, 4 Pushcart Prizes, and a PEN Robert J. Dow Best Debut Fiction Prize. Whew, that's so many awards, I need to take a breath. Nemens grew up in Seattle and received her bachelor's degree from Brown University, where she studied art history and studio art, hence the hidden talents. She completed an MFA degree in fiction at Louisiana State University. As an illustrator, she's collaborated with Harvey P. Carr, published her work in The New Yorker, and her watercolor portraits of every woman in Congress were featured across the web and on national TV. And I highly encourage everyone to Google them because they're awesome. Her short stories have appeared in Blackbird, Esquire, N+1, the Iowa Review, Hobart, and the Gettysburg Review. And she lives in New York. So on to the Cactus League. I really like the blurb of this book, so I'm going to read it. I think it gives people a really good feel for the story. And then I would love to have you read the actual thing. So here's the book description. Do you write these book descriptions, Emily? I write my own because me.
No, it was collaborative with my editor.
It's a very diplomatic thing to say. Here's the collaborative book description. Jason Goodyear is the star outfielder for the Los Angeles Lions, stationed with the rest of his team in the punishingly hot Arizona desert for their annual spring training. Handsome, famous, and talented, it's a good trifecta, Goodyear is nonetheless coming apart at the seams, and the coaches, writers, wives, girlfriends, petty criminals, and diehard fans following his every move are eager to find out why, as they hide secrets of their own. Humming with the energy of a ballpark before the first pitch, Emily Nemens' The Cactus League unravels the tightly connected web of people behind a seemingly linear game. Narrated by a sportscaster, Goodyear's story is interspersed with tales of Michael Taylor, a batting coach trying to stay relevant, Tamara Rowland, a resourceful spring training paramour looking for one last catch, I like that line, Herb Allison, a legendary sports agent grappling with his decline, and a plethora of other richly drawn characters, all striving to be seen as the season approaches. It's a journey that, like the Arizona desert, brims with both possibility and destruction. Anchored by an expert knowledge of baseball's inner workings, Emily Nemens' The Cactus League is a propulsive and deeply human debut that captures a strange desert world that is both exciting and unforgiving, where the most crucial games are the ones played on the field, off the field, not on the field. That was a fantastic collaborative blurb. I love it. And I have a million questions that I want to ask you, so I'm going to force you to read first so that I can launch into
it. I'll just read for a few minutes so people can get a sense of the book. Here's the cover. I know you've been reading an e-copy, but thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to everyone at the Foundation for hosting me. I was really eager to support the Translation Prize, and I'm glad to be here tonight. Congrats to you, Karin, as well on your debut, or not your debut, your book's debut. Coming out in the time of COVID is a weird thing.
You like just skirted it, but it's also kind of by like a month.
I got a little ahead of it. I mean, I canceled at this point. I've canceled more events than I had, which that's not great math. But I did get to bring the book to my hometown, to Seattle, which was really meaningful. And I had my launch event here in New York City with David Duchovny, who is also a baseball literary fiction writer. Anyway, so I feel very fortunate for that. I thought, you mentioned the sports writer who frames the narrative, and I thought I'd just read the first few pages of his introduction. Welcome to Salt River Fields, the newest spring training facility in Scottsdale, Arizona. Turn east off of Pima, drive down the fresh boulevard, Lions Way. You're flanked by parking lots so new they still smell like tar, their white hatching wet. Ample parking for the anticipated crowds already sold out for opening day. Note the median's plantings, environmentally sustainable xeriscape. Of course, this is 2011, and the club cares about our natural resources, is mindful of the perpetual drought in Phoenix Metro. A few Christmas cacti bloom, despite it being February. And here, at the terminus of the boulevard, the centerpiece of the multi-field complex, the 12,000-seat stadium that will be the new springtime home of your Los Angeles Lions. Take it all in, the crisp chalk diamond, the ready arc of infield, the bright checkerboard of the outfield. It's not easy to grow grass like that in the desert. I offer a hat tip to the grounds crew. And see out past the warning track and fence, there's the shop green tilt of a well-watered general admission lawn. Farther still, on the horizon, a ridge of mountains just jutting into the blue like teeth of some mile-high rusted saw. Take note of the architecture too, the exposed steel beams and brick, a slate gray cantilevered canopy over a sunken seating bowl, the polished concrete rotunda and concourse. A classic-looking stadium, timeless in design, some might say, even if it's anything but. Nothing is static, not the bluegrass-ryegrass blend growing out there, not the architecture, not the angle of the sun hitting the seats, and not a man's career, especially not a ball player, the first weeks of spring. His batting average, his ambition, his hopes, all is in flux. I'm looking towards Lions left fielder Jason Goodyear as I write this, coming off a gold glove and a close second in American League MVP voting, coming off a possible divorce and a lonely drive across the desert in his busted old Jeep. But that feeling of uncertainty isn't reserved for all-stars and the freshly dumped. It could apply to any player on the squad, any coach on the bench, any man in the executive suite, any fan in the stands. I'm looking at his entourage, Herb Allison, his agent, his maybe wife Liana, his favorite minor league batting coach, and the devotees who would give an eye tooth just to be near him. It's all up in the air. Here's the thing about baseball and all else. Everything changes, whether it's the slow creep of glaciers dripping toward the sea, or the steady piling up of cut stones, rock upon rock until the wall reaches chest high. Nothing is still. Sometimes change comes as quick and catastrophic as a line drive. Hear the crack of wood displacing a sphere of leather, yarn, rubber, and cork. Watch how it pushes the ball flat and then just as quickly forward. The action springs the left fielder from his squat, and the man's metal spikes tear into the turf, kicking up tiny wedges of grass, sending them towards the sky. Sure, I followed I-10 across the desert to write the story of one remarkable man, but baseball's not that kind of game. It's too long and complicated to say, he did this, he said that, then this happened. That sufficed when I was first working the beat, still wet behind the ears and liable to get lost on my way to the press room. Back then, it was get the score, get the quote, add a little color, and file 162 times a year. I was such a kid, spooked by his own damn shadow, downright fearful of asking for any kind of tough question, something that might be construed as disagreeable. Now, I'm no muckraker and not setting out to take down a great man, but in this life, things are complex, some questions are hard, and that's why I drove to Arizona in the first place.
Yay! I love it. It's beautiful. It so makes me want to be outside.
I know.
Even Arizona, the punishing desert. I will go anywhere, but you really you set the setting so well. And there's so many things I want to ask you, but the first thing I have to ask you is baseball. Mm-hmm. I read a lot of reviews and people said she knows a heck of a lot about baseball and she has worked in literary magazine land for a long time. How does she know about baseball? So tell me about your passion for baseball.
Oh my goodness. I had a little book malfunction over here. Passionate. Is my lighting still okay? So I grew up a Mariners fan. I grew up in Seattle, and I love in the era of Ken Griffey Jr. and early Alex Rodriguez and Brandy Johnson. And my dad's actually a New Yorker who, was a Yankees fan and had to settle for the Mariners when he moved west. And so I grew up loving the game, watching the game, and I started going to spring training as this annual or sort of every other year ritual with my dad. And it felt a little bit like the carnival, like a million people show up for practice baseball games. And that's a weird thing, right? It's just the subculture of, of course the athletes need to get there to get in shape and figure out who's making the team and not, that's pretty pragmatic. But for all the other people where this game and these practice games where the scores don't count mattered so much was just this kind of delicious conundrum. And so, I kept going as a fan. And then almost 10 years ago when I started a graduate program and was really sitting down to make a concerted effort on my first, major work, I was like, what do I like enough? What am I interested enough in? What's complicated enough that I could spend a long time writing this? And, the way I think about baseball, the way I think about sports, whether it's football in France or, basketball in the States or whatever it is, the way professional sports are presented and embraced by a community says a lot about that culture. The same way, you can look at your celebrities, look at your star musicians, look at the visual arts of a time in an era and what's embraced and what's celebrated and how it's supported is says a lot about the culture. So I was excited to write about this thing I love, but hold a magnifying glass up to it.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I was telling Emily before we were live that I don't really watch sports, but I like everything around sports. And I read the book Friday Night Lights, which is written by a journalist. And I was like deeply obsessed with the movie, deeply obsessed with the show. And then I met this guy who was a football player and then I married him. So basically Friday Night Lights like greatly influenced my marriage. And I read something in the New York Times about your book that said, the real subject here is less the game of baseball itself, though she's quite good at describing it, than its infrastructure, all the lives that professional baseball embraces. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk about that because there's actually not that much baseball like in the book. It's mostly about
No.
the lives of the people. And that's what I really loved. And I think that's what other people will love. How did you have more baseball and then cut it? Or did you know that this was the way you were going?
I had a little bit more baseball, but I cut it. But I also knew from the outset this wasn't going to be a lot of innings played. There's that is territory that has been well covered elsewhere. So much of baseball literature and sports literature in general is really reliant on, the buzzer beater or the bottom of the ninth or the World Series, the shot heard around the world. There's a real trope and a reliance there on the sort of last monumental heroic performance as narrative device. It's really satisfying to read it, but I also was like, okay, that's somebody else has been there and done that. So
Yeah.
What are the other stories? Where else is the drama in this season? What else can I talk about? So I had that mandate sort of from the beginning. And in terms of researching it, I think there's a wide range, more narrative possibility in terms of conflict and drama off the field than on the field. I mean, either you strike out or you hit a home run, right? Or there's an injury, or sometimes you get a good brawl at home plate. But there's a limited set of stories that take place on the field. But if you let those athletes and that community out into the community, the possibilities are sort of endless. And I was really excited by that and thinking about both the athletes off the field, but really, the equalizing force of once you're off the field, they're just people too. So who else is in that infrastructure? The front office, the coach, the fans, the stadium organist shows up later in the book, and giving all of them airtime too.
Yeah. Did you go back to spring training when you were researching this book?
I did. Seattle in March is a miserably cold, wet place. And so we had a good habit of going down when I was still living in Seattle. And then when I lived on the East Coast in New York and then Louisiana too, it's still easier to meet my dad in Phoenix than fly all the way back up to Seattle. And March in Seattle is still drab and cold. So I'd go every few years, and I went once or twice just to do research, and I just read a whole lot, everything from other baseball novels to a lot of reportage, everything from box scores all the way up through book length portraits of seasons and players. It was, I love going to spring training. I could research this book for the rest of my life, right?
Yeah. I love it. But then someone cuts you off and tells you have to turn it in, right? That's the
bummer. Did she ever? Yeah.
How long did you work on this? Because I know you started working on it in school.
Yeah. So, I went back to graduate school later. I worked for my 20s in New York City in different arts organizations. And then, I said, I love writing and editing, but I really want to focus on literature. So I moved down to Louisiana and started writing in 2011. Also in 2011, I started working at the Southern Review, which ended up being a literary home for me. For 7 years, I was co-editor for the last 5 years of those, and came back up to New York to start at the Paris Review 2 years ago. I say all of that to say that it's been a busy decade, and it's mostly evenings and weekends for the book. So I had a really strong draft by 2015, I'd say. But at that point, I had all of these characters, and they were in the same place at the same time, but they weren't dancing together. And so it took a few more really big overhauls to get them all on the same timeline.
Yeah.
In the same season, really.
That's great. Yeah, it's hard to decide when a story's over too. It's if editors didn't take them from our shaking hands, I feel like we would just Donna Tart it and work on books for 10 years. So I'm glad your book.
Well, I mean, mine was 8.
So you did not Donna Tart it. You got out 2 years before.
Yeah, 2 years ahead.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, but honestly, if I made her money, I would also just write a book every 10 years.
Yeah. How did you figure out with your last book? When did it feel done? Like, did you get to it and you were like, all right, this is it, or was it working against that deadline?
I think it's always working against a deadline. I mean,
Yeah.
you turn it in and you're like, I can't read it again because I'll want to change everything.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if you felt this way, like the week before it comes out, I'm like, do I like this book? I think I hate it. Like, why did I write this book? I don't even know.
I still know I like this book. I was like a little scared to crack it open again. I think that emotion was definitely true. You know, for me, the big last edit, I have this art history degree. I love describing places. I've done a lot of, when I was in school, I did a lot of research on landscape painting, and being from the West, just like talking about vast landscapes is really exciting and interesting to me. That paired with the fact that I spent several years in my 20s writing about architecture, like there's just a ton of description of place and description of everything. You know, you're trained, a certain kind of art historian is trained to describe, you know, paintings from the central composition all the way out to the corners and, you know, getting down to the foliage and the shadow, right? So my editor said, you know, you're a little long-winded, Emily. You go on just a bit. And I said, okay, but, you know, take care of, you know, what needs to get fixed in chapter 5 and at the end on this edit. But next edit, I'm going to cut some of that back. And the idea that someone else might control the cadence and the tempo and the detail. I love my editor and I trust her, but I was also terrified. And so that last edit, after I sort of figured out the last of the structural work, I cut 25,000 words line by line.
25,000 for those who don't work in words. That's a fourth of a book. That's like 100 pages of a novel.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it ended up being about 85. So yeah, like 1 out of every 5 words. And I'm really happy with the result. It feels lean. It feels propulsive. It's got enough description. You know, mostly I like feel startled, but I thought all of that extra weight was okay. You know, that the not that I don't love a good description, but you know, it just felt baggier than it needed to be.
Yeah, I think that's why we love our editors, right? Because they tell us when things are bad and we have to listen to them. So
yeah, exactly.
It's good. Well, your descriptions are still beautiful and you can totally tell you have an artistic background. When I write, it's like dialogue, tree, sky, blue, fix later. But like
dialogue is the hardest for me.
I was should just write a book
hitting my head against the desk for weeks and months. Yeah.
No, I feel like most writers, it's one or the other. You feel more comfortable doing one than you do the other. So
there's do your voices, like do your characters, the way they speak, what they want to say, does that come out naturally, or do you have to do like a lot of character development and sketching?
No, that part is so natural to me. It's the like, I'd like them to be on an empty stage and not have to describe anything around them whatsoever. But even the first chapter of your book, I was like, this is very transportive, and I think people really want that right now too. So I think it's a really good book for this moment. I mean, it takes you to a different place and you can experience a sport without having to leave your chair, which is
right. Well, I mean, you can
lovely.
experience a sport at all. I think I don't know, Karin, how much you've been reading about just, you know, sports getting canceled and how weird that's been for so many people. I mean, athletes, of course, but I think, you know, the same way we all binge watch Netflix, like a whole lot of people rely on a few innings of baseball at the end of the night. So, I mean, I'm at that point, I'm like, man, I wish I had written more baseball innings into the book. But there's a few. Chapter 5 has like 6 innings in it.
Okay. Amazing. Well, let's talk about characters, because you say that you're better at descriptions, and I do love your descriptions, but I really am enjoying your character development and kind of your like the characterness of your characters, you know, like you could have played it more straight and like just focused more on these like all-American players or type things, but you have I'll read again from a New York Times excerpt. Some of Nemens' best characters aren't ball players at all. There's a homeless family, for example, a single mom and 2 kids, squatting in a half-finished house abandoned during the Phoenix housing crash of 2008, while the mother tries to put takeout food on the table and also tend to her drug habit by selling hot dogs at the stadium. And you have a lot of kind of on the fringe characters like this, on the fringes of baseball, but also on the fringes of society. Is this something that you kind of saw when you were down there, or is this something that you kind of more wanted to write about and imagined?
I definitely saw it. We would stay in Scottsdale where the book is set, and it's literally on the fringe of the Phoenix metro area. It's eastern border is an Indian reservation and then a mountain range. Like it's sort of literally where the sidewalk ends, and going periodically over, at this point, 25 years, seeing that sidewalk get pushed farther and farther sort of up the side of the mountain. And then this moment with the recession that just stalled out. A lot of people lost their shirt. Developments were abandoned. Neighborhoods that had been nice ones were sort of either slowly or quickly repossessed. And for the sake of the book, there's a bit of hyperbole in terms of certain neighborhoods going to seed, but not that much. It was really stark and really hard there. And I did want to write. I did want to write about class. I did want to write about crisis and the economic recession. And I guess that feels weird and uncanny too, just to have been looking at it retrospectively with a lot of time to process and digest a really hard moment in American culture and be like, oh wait, we're right on the edge of something maybe even worse right now. But I think people think about spring training as a moment of hope, and it's definitely that. But what is the inverse or the complement to that is people who have that hope, but maybe but for them it's not just hope, it's desperation, right? There's 2 sides to that coin. So exploring those narratives alongside sort of the more typical golden boy, all-star athlete, number 1 draft pick, putting those people all in the same stadium was an exciting thing to write about.
Yeah, it's an exciting thing to read about. It made me think about sports in general and sports in America and all those moments when your team wins and you're like crying and you're like, I'm literally just drunk and I'm so excited that other people have done this thing. It feels like a part of me, and I think you really tapped into that really well.
Yeah, and in that way, it was definitely about baseball. But I was living in Louisiana and watching SEC football, and being in Baton Rouge, a quarter million people show up on 8 Saturdays in the fall, and just being somewhere new and fairly disoriented, and seeing just this tidal wave of fans, and both the excitement and the energy of that, but also the wild mood swings when something. When they blow a game or even just miss a catch, the emotional surge of that and the collective experience of spectator sports is it's such an interesting phenomenon.
Absolutely. I would cheer on anything right now. Literally, I would cheer on people reading. I would watch people read books. I would
Have you heard that athletes are playing video games of themselves on ESPN?
Of course they are.
Basketball.
I would watch that. I would watch anything with an adrenaline rush right now.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting some questions coming in. If you all have questions, please ask them. You can put them in the Q&A at the bottom or in the chat. Our first one is from Megan. She says, hi, Karin and Emily. Congratulations to you both on your books. Emily, you talked about being a dedicated Mariners fan and the inspiration for the book. Can you tell us a memorable anecdote from your research process? Any fun encounters, meetings, or particularly special ballparks?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks, Megan. I think, I did a lot of this research in books, watching baseball, watching documentaries about baseball. That was all fun, but not that memorable. I was pretty far along in the process of writing and knew I had this chapter that was juxtaposing this he was 19-year-old rookie that had been drafted right out of high school, and this 70-something-year-old organist who had been in the Phoenix area for forever, and he had played the organ, like a pretty traditional old organ like you might have at Fenway Park, at the old stadium. When they updated the stadium and tore out the organ, he'd been given this computer and he didn't know what to do with it. So, and the young guy and the old guy becoming friends was sort of the conceit of that chapter. I was at a work event and someone in Western Massachusetts, of all places, and someone tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "Oh, did you know that guy over there is the organist for Fenway Park?" And I made a beeline, and we were all there for the weekend. And I said, we have the next meal together. Can I sit down and just sort of politely grill you and talk about all of the things that my organist was experiencing, the way he plays, sort of the culture of organists, how they interact with other guys in the stadium. He's like, "Yeah, sure." And we had this great conversation, and I got most of my details right the first time, which was a great feeling. And he gave me some really fun stories. And then, we just kept in touch a little bit on Twitter. And then, I had a book event in Boston and he came. So that was a really nice full circle. So thank you to Josh Cantor for playing the organ at Fenway Park.
Oh my gosh. Did the guy who told you know what you were writing about, or was this just like a completely random thing?
They knew I was working on a baseball book, and they were like, "Oh, there's another baseball." It was like an artsy weekend, and so they're like, "Okay, the two people who like baseball in this room should probably talk." And I was like, "Little, you did not realize how much I need to talk to that guy."
That is, absolutely. That's really cool. All right. Isaac Foster asks, what are some other works of baseball or sports literature that you admire?
That's a great question. I also have here a copy of the Paris Review, and I mention it now because the magazine published in serialization Chris Batchelder's The Throwback Special for those folks who like football literature. It was a really beautiful book. It was, in 4 parts in the magazine, and then came out, I think, in 2015 or 2016. It's about this football team. All the guys are retired, but they get together every year to sort of relive this great play that they all experience together. And of course, it's really more of a group portrait of masculinity and the complications of aging and sort of the life of all of these athletes after they've left the team. And it was brilliant. Such a good book. Let's see what else. I really love, growing up in the Northwest, there's a book called The Brothers K, which is by David James Duncan, which is about a family in Eastern Washington where the dad's, a really great prospect, but hurts his hand, and sort of the impact that has on the family in the short and long term in terms of the father trying to get back into playing, and sort of all the sons growing up watching their father struggle. I love that book. The Art of Fielding is really good.
Nice. Have you ever read The 80-Yard Run by Irwin Shaw? The short story?
Oh,
you gotta read it. It's so good.
I gotta read it, yeah.
And it's short. It's a short story. But it has the same themes of like regret, of having, you live this giant thing, often so young, and often like the rest of your life just does not measure up. And it's kind of all about that and growing old.
Yeah.
And luckily, some of us did not excel at sports in their youth, so we don't have to deal with those things.
No, don't have to deal with it personally. I got cut from the softball team at 15, and I was like, great, I tried, and now I'm going to go be a spectator. Little did I know that I would, later have a softball team.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the media league. We're really hoping that we can get a few games in this summer.
Me
Beat the New
too.
Yorker.
Nice. I love Beat the New Yorker. That's incredible. Val asks, hi, Emily. Have you found that baseball culture differs throughout the U.S. between your childhood in Seattle, your father's experience in New York, and your research in the Southwest? And if so, how has your experience influenced your writing process of this book?
You know, it definitely does feel different in different parts of the country. I had no idea of the Boston New York rivalry out west. I just thought they were both teams that were better than the Mariners. And like only when I came to the East Coast and like saw the rabid hatred between them, I was like, oh, that's different. You know, and I think also just placing the book, you know, 10 years ago and thinking about my fandom, which started in the 80s, and thinking about sort of where sports are now, I think maybe even more than regionally. It's interesting to sort of plot and chart out how sort of the ascendancy or maybe more descendancy of baseball in American culture. And, you know, over the last 30 years, really thinking about how football has become more popular. Baseball has sort of lost some of that market share. And, you know, some of that, there's a certain amount of nostalgia in the book, you know, not I guess a pointed nostalgia, like recognizing that baseball is perhaps past its prime in terms of its seat in American culture, but it still has this really important thing to say about how it brings communities together. So that's not necessarily regional as much as it is temporal, but I've seen all different sides of it. I think I'm also really aware of it because when I left Seattle, you know, in 2001 to leave for school and went to Brown, Seattle was a baseball town, and I came back and it's a football town now. And yeah, and it's just such a strange. It's interesting to watch sort of how how communities gather around different sports and what the sports say. And, you know, Paul Goldberger has a great book out called Ballpark that sort of talks about the way stadiums are built, you know, looking at baseball stadiums really deeply, but also talking about them in comparison to sort of the cultures and priorities of a football stadium versus a baseball stadium. And, you know, baseball stadiums are, you know, emphasizing privilege being close to the field and having, you know, turning in a way that you're looking at the field, but you're also in proximity to a lot of your neighbors. And, you know, there's some big baseball stadiums, but intimacy is a priority. And with football, like the best seats are actually kind of high up, right? And the stadiums are somewhere between, you know, 1.5 and 2 times as big, and suburban rather than urban. And, you know, baseball stadiums are, especially places like Fenway, are, you know, flexible as to fit into the grid of the city, whereas, you know, donut stadiums and the architecture of football is really much more imposing on the landscape and just sort of plops down wherever it wants and has these really rigid dimensions. And the difference between those two stadiums and the way people interact with them says a lot about American culture. So I guess I sort of look at different towns and think, all right, is this a baseball town or a football town? And you know, so I do think about it regionally that way. That's a really long roundabout answer to your question, Val. But I do think, you know, the baseball of Arizona, when you're in these little stadiums, you know, they're 10,000 seaters, you're really up close and personal with the athletes. Those are a lot of fun, and I think it's hard to not be, you know, they're transient teams. You don't have your same players the same way you have, you know, New Yorkers all know the Yankees lineup, right? But you're swapping out like a real proximity and access in the Southwest.
Yeah, I get that. I remember the first time I ever went to a minor league game, and I was like, I'm basically sitting on the field. Like, I feel like I should cover my entire face before I die. But like, it's amazing. You are so close in a minor league stadium.
Yeah.
You know, if I could ever afford the good seats in a major league stadium, it's that same feeling. There is that intimacy, and it's great. Also, baseball doesn't stop every like 20 seconds like football, so it has my vote.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, leisurely in that, you know, the pitcher has to make sure he knows what he's throwing. He has to think about it again. It's not a fast game, but you're right. It's not so start and stop as football.
Yeah. All right, we have a question from Samuel Martin. Hello, Emily. I'd be curious to know how important you found your editorial background to be when you were writing your book. Did your authorial self end up doing anything that your editorial self may not have recommended? Ooh, that's a good question.
That's a good question. You know, my editorial self had more things to do, and so I was, you know, more often wearing my editor's hat and more often problem solving on other people's manuscripts. You know, not that I would shut down the Cactus League, but just, you know, hours in the day. I would work when I was in Louisiana. I had built out a schedule where I did, you know, 4 really long days on the magazine and 2 writing days and then a day off. And so, but I found that editorial work, you know, and problem solving and appreciating good work, and then, you know, appreciating other good works that could also be improved. And those, you know, with a quarterly, you have to solve so many different problems so quickly. You know, it's not, I have a huge amount of respect for book editors, but you get to work with the same writer for a long time. You know their ticks, you know their weaknesses. You have the time to build out that relationship where there's sort of a toolkit of things that, you know, you'll need to correct for. Oh, Emily's long-winded, I'm going to have to edit her back. But when you're encountering writers for the first time in so many different styles and so many different possibilities, it makes you a particularly nimble and responsive editor. And so when I got back to my manuscript, I just felt really poised to problem solve in a way I was really excited about. So I was grateful for that. You know, I wish I had more time for writing, but I was really grateful that time I was writing was, you know, sort of high yield, revising. You know, George Saunders did an art of fiction interview in the winter issue and talked about intuition, and, you know, as intellectual and academic as we can all be, sometimes good solutions and the right answer for where your story should go next sort of lands at your feet or hits you in the forehead, or, you know, comes to you in a way that you can't analyze. And I think that definitely happened for me as well, in a way that the editor in me would, you know, not believe in kismet. But I think the writer, I came across more than a few happy solutions or just things that felt just right in a way that, you know, I don't think I could have studied my way to those solutions. And so I need to keep both brains happy and healthy, I think, is the answer.
Yeah. Now maybe when writers are like, but this is my gut response, you're gonna be like, fine, maybe we'll allow this. No, you read pen.
Yeah, I mean, I usually, if you know, I really butt heads with an author on something and feel like I have a good idea for how to make things better, and they say no, absolutely not, I don't usually ask a second time in a different way. And if they're still really stubborn about it, it's their work, and I want it to look the way they want it to. So, you know, you can only, yeah. So that's usually how that dance goes.
That's good dance. Well, I know we're getting close to time, but I do want to talk about you as an artist before we go, because I really have so much admiration for your art. It's beautiful. And
thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. The series you did on Congresswoman, I remember seeing it. It really was everywhere after you did it. And I wanted to ask if you're working on anything else, or how you even find time to get that part of you in, which must be a very big part of you since you studied it for so long. And
Yeah, I'm not doing a lot of drawing right now, which is pretty frustrating. I wish I could turn the camera around. I have this really big desk, and like got an apartment, thank God, that was big enough for a really big desk with, good windows, good lighting, and I have a whole drawer over here of watercolors and fancy pens and paper. So as the election season approaches, approaches were already in it. I have been thinking about returning to political portraiture. For me, I did a few comics in my 20s and I love reading them and I like being a part of that conversation, but like drawing in little squares and trying to figure out the minimal amount of line that could express what you're trying to get. And it felt too constrained for my taste, and it was not exciting. It wasn't fun to draw in that format for me, but I like sort of the iterative process of the comic book and the idea of the frames and repeating and how they change. And so, landing on an iterative project like drawing every woman in Congress was, it sort of fed that need or that excitement about the step and repeat, but then also, fed into the art historian and this long tradition of political portraiture in the U.S. and Europe, and that was really exciting as well. I think it was also just a strange moment and exciting and really affirming as a young artist to have. It was a good moment for the media cycle, like for a smart political art project to go viral. I feel like I see so many memes about the Tiger King, and and that's fine. Listen, escapism right now is absolutely okay, but it was just a really heartening moment when I was able to make art that discussed the disparity in representation in the U.S. and people were looking at it and talking about it, and that these neurotic little watercolors like really raised awareness about how many more men than women there were in Congress, and the expectations of presentation that still persisted, as of a few years ago. I mean, not even as of a few years ago. I feel like people still talk about, women Congress people, Congresswomen's outfits a lot more than Congressmen, right?
Definitely.
And what an opportunity it was to make art that just enter the public discourse that way. So I miss it. I wish I had like 3 more Thursdays of every week, so I could just not do anything, but just do a few more things.
Yeah, well, I'm going to propose something to you. I think you should have your female VPs at the ready for when Biden announces.
You're right. I have like an Elizabeth Warren circa 2014, but I haven't done all of them.
All right. I'm ready. I'm ready to see that. I'm ready to be a viewer of that art. So in all your spare time. Well, Emily, thank you so much. This was a real treat for me, and I know for our audience.
Oh,
thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
You're too talented. You're good at everything, and honestly, it's very fun to talk about it all with you. So, I am going to throw it back to Val, who I know has a few announcements to make. And thank you to Emily and to everyone watching.
Thank you, Karin. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, so on behalf of all of us at the French American Foundation, Emily, thank you so much for taking us through the Cactus League and your process in writing it, and to you, Karin, for moderating such a great and candid discussion between both of you as authors. I'm sure I speak for everyone online when I say that this is a great way to end the day, and I'm looking forward to reading both of your books. Just one quick announcement that our next webinar will be next Thursday, April 23rd at 1 p.m. with best-selling French novelist Marc Levy, who will be talking to us about creativity in challenging times. So again, thank you to everyone online. Thank you to both of you. And we hope to see you all next week.
Nice. Thank you so much, Val. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Bye.
Night, everyone.
Bye.